Hello and welcome to Autistic FM. My name is Haje, I use he, him pronouns, and I'm your host on this journey. You can subscribe to Autistic FM wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find a transcript and additional information about each episode on autistic.fm. In this episode of the podcast, I'm joined by Philipp Wolf, a German serial entrepreneur and producer based in Montreal, who leads Swyvl, a company dedicated to empowering individuals to understand and embrace neurodiversity through immersive experiences. Philipp has an extensive background in visual effects production, contributing to iconic blockbusters like Dune Part 1 and Ghost in the Shell. During our conversation, Philipp shared his personal journey of discovering and, far more importantly, accepting his neurodivergent identity. A process that began with the social media algorithms discovering something about Philipp he hadn't realized yet, and then culminating in a diagnosis at age 38. Philipp opens up about the challenges and revelations of unmasking, his quest for self-acceptance, and the delicate balance of accommodating his needs while navigating relationships and societal expectations. Anyway, that's quite enough of my waffling. This is one of my most favorite episodes to date, and you're in for a real treat. Let's roll the tape. Hello, dear guest. I am curious what your name is and what pronouns you use.
My name is Philipp Wolf, and my pronouns are he and him.
And where in the world are you?
I'm based in Montreal, Canada.
So, Philipp, when and how did you realize you might be neurodivergent?
I think throughout my whole life I knew that I was operating differently, and I was never really able to put a finger on it. And ultimately, what was the giveaway was watching one of those TV shows where you have a very neurodivergent character in the lead, a very cliche version of it, and you realize, oh, yeah, okay, I can resonate with that and with that and with that. Oh, okay, and then you start seeing the algorithm on social media showing you more and more content from neurodivergent individuals, and you realize, like, oh, maybe there's something to it. So about 2 years ago in March, okay, I got an official diagnostic and got the label neurodivergent attached to me.
I mean, it's kind of weird, isn't it, when the algos figure it out before you do?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, especially when you start telling family and friends. Family, you usually like, okay, where are you getting this from? Because it's a genetic condition, right? So there's a high likelihood that if I'm neurodivergent, my parents are too. So listing their traits was actually also eye-opening for them, because for them this was also normal. Telling it to friends was more like, yeah, okay, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, we knew this. Yeah, and it's like, okay, cool. And this. It seems like this typical story of neurodivergent individuals telling their friends, like, hey, yeah, we knew it before you. And it's like, okay, why didn't you tell me?
Well, because they think you know, right? It's one of those things where it's really interesting. I had a very similar experience. Everybody knew before me, but it turns out that's such a common story that it becomes one of those, oh, okay. I think that's really funny.
Yeah, and it can lead to those moments. I with my therapist, I called them love-hate situations, where it's like she points something out which is so obvious that I hate that I didn't see it myself, but I love for now having this awareness and being able to acknowledge it. And at the end, it is about self-acceptance. It is about realizing who you are, how do you operate, and how do I enable myself to be, to be.
It's like one of those auto-stereograms, right? You stare at it for a while, and then eventually it just something just pops out of the page, and it was always there, but somehow weren't able to see it.
Yeah, but it's you would think it's one of the stereotypes is pattern recognition, right? And I have a very good sense of pattern recognition, and I would argue I'm pretty good in lateral thinking. But when you look at a stereograph, for example, or when you look at a situation of like, oh yeah, you tend to do things that are maybe beneficial to you, but in the long term might hurt you, So you look at those two things and yeah, at some point it becomes obvious. And usually when it becomes obvious, you can't unsee it anymore. So same with the stereogram. You look at the same stereogram again with a reasonable amount of time in between, and you will immediately see it. And the same thing with those patterns of, hey, you're doing something that seems beneficial, but in the long term hurts. You can't unsee it.
I think that is particularly true in like close friendships and romantic relationships, right? I get closer and closer and closer to someone and I want to unmask, but it feels like a bait and switch because I'm like, hey, I'm kind of a pretty different person than the person you know. And if I'm lucky, they're like, oh, I like you even more now, right? But my bet often has been, like, oh, actually, we kind of like the other guy better. It's like, oh, it's so painful.
Yeah, and this whole unmasking journey, I got diagnosed when I was 38 years old. So I don't know myself without the mask. One big realization for me was my mask is still me. It's part of me. Even though it's constructed to protect me from, I don't know, trauma, experiences, who knows. But it's what you just mentioned of with your partner. I mean, my partner and I, we're married now for, I want to say 3-4 years, I don't know. And we're an item for 13 years. So she knew me for 10 years without this diagnosis, without this unmasking journey. And now has to partake in a life where I, of course, don't really want to be putting energy into maintaining a mask, especially around her, because I think around your partner, especially being vulnerable, being who you are, and fairly honestly, still figuring out who you are, is so important and so profound. And the beautiful thing with my wife is she's supporting me throughout the way. Yes, there are moments where it's clashing. Yes, there are moments where we realize, okay, an accommodation for me might be a trigger for her, and vice versa. So there is a new baseline to be found, but it's important. And I personally always think if you come from a place of self-acceptance, it's easier than if you're not. If you're looking at everything elsewhere outside, it's like, oh no, it's because of my partner, it's because of their. No, it's my partner is doing the best she can with the knowledge she has within the horizon she has currently in front of her, and not everything is about me. So it's actually fairly likely that, and this is a hypothesis I have, that most things we do is for us. We're trying to do things so we feel better. So even masking is something we don't do for other people. We do to protect us. We do to get away from nasty comments or weird things. And it's a very interesting thing.
Yeah. Well, I've done a lot of thinking about this, obviously. For me, the interesting piece is like I asked this of several people, like, do you mask for you or do you mask for them kind of thing? And I think you're right, but I think it's kind of a second order thing, right? I mask because I don't want to be perceived as weird, because then I get othered and then I don't get to be part of the fun kids. And so it's like this kind of second order effect. I mask for me, but in order to protect them, so they will protect me or they won't know how weird I am kind of thing. And it's kind of this weird dance between which parts do I feel safe with and which parts do I feel less safe with? Like I was bullied a lot and I realized the more I masked, the less I got bullied. I was like, well, I am masking to protect myself from bullying, but I'm also realizing by masking, I'm not sticking out so much. And so I'm less of a target. So it feels very complex.
I agree. It is very complex. And it is a thing that what you just mentioned, when after my diagnostic, I went into half a year existential crisis of trying to understand who am I, who was I, what am I. It was like, okay, cool, nice, that's fun. And I realized as well, I got bullied, and this mask is something you put on as a form of trauma response. So you get bullied, you put on a mask to not get bullied, and maybe be included, and it is this survival mechanism at the end. And when you look at masking in a different form, so for example, one of the comorbidities I have is alexithymia. So I have a very hard time identifying and being connected with my emotions. So this could be just due to the fact of, hey, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm whatever, and you get constantly being told, oh, it's not that bad. And you're basically being systemically invalidated. And with that, at some point, the adolescent brain likely said, so if they always keep telling me, oh, why am I upset? There's nothing to be upset about, then maybe I should just stop feeling in the first place. And yay, here we are.
I also have alexithymia. It's very complicated for me. But I'm recognizing two emotions in me right now. One of them is fear. It's like, okay, what if that is true? And what if this is something I kind of did to myself? And the other one is like, that means that it is controllable. That means that it is trainable. That means that I may actually have the capacity for a deeper, more meaningful relationship with my own emotions. And that fills me with hope.
It's very interesting. Because the thing is, I've been on a journey of self-acceptance over the last 2 years, basically, trying to learn and what does being autistic, ADHD, gifted even mean? Realizing that research is all over the place, realizing that there's so many things like, oh, hypermobility. I have that. Apparently comorbidity. So many other things. And alexithymia was something that before, I was seeing a therapist long before my diagnostic. And at some point she was like, oh yeah, you might have alexithymia. And so I started looking into it and I'm like, okay, interesting. And with the diagnostic, I found a couple of texts that were suggesting that especially alexithymia in late diagnosed adults might be a trauma response and not be a psychological, physiological thing. So the interesting bit, what I realized is in my journey of self-acceptance, that I started being able to connect with my emotions. And the way I figured this out was I also have a challenge with interoception. So I have a very hard time understanding when am I thirsty? When am I hungry? When do I need to go to the bathroom? Things like that. Things like that sound like, oh yeah, okay, that's normal, right? You eat, you sleep, you do. I fall asleep with scrolling through TikTok until I pass out. Because I don't feel tired. And it's not good. It's not helpful because sleep is important, especially when you have a neurodivergent brain. But the moment I started to foster this self-acceptance and be like, hey, what I'm feeling right now, even though I can't identify it, it's part of this journey. And it's okay to be part of that journey. And I'm going to just embrace it, even though I can't label it, and move forward. The first thing that happened is I started feeling thirsty. And that was interesting. And then I started realizing that I had, with very small motor tasks, fine motor tasks, I was profoundly sweating. I had tremors. I developed nosebleeds. And I started making this all an active acknowledgement, an active acknowledgement. What I did is I basically used the shortcut app on my phone and created a shortcut that tracks sweating, tremors, nosebleeds, when I invalidate myself or when I'm trying to fight an emotion, and made it an active choice afterwards. Because I very strongly believe if you acknowledge something, it becomes a choice. Because the moment you acknowledge, you start seeing a pattern evolve. And that really started helping me to feel more, still have a hard time labeling things of like, oh, am I sad? Am I excited? Am I anxious? Funny bit with anxious and excited is both of them live very close together.
Yeah.
So whenever you feel anxious, you might actually be excited. And whenever you feel excited, you might actually be anxious. It's funny how our brain works. But it's things like this which enabled me to connect better with myself. And to your point of having control over it, I think it's a bit of a stretch to say control over it. I think it's an active mechanism within us. But when we start acknowledging certain patterns of that, we develop a tool set to engage with it.
Somebody once told me that any emotion lasts 90 seconds. And if it lasts for more than 90 seconds, it's because it's being fueled by something. Now, I don't know if that's, like, I haven't Googled it. I don't know if that's true. But as a thought experiment, that's actually been really helpful. I'm feeling a discomfort for a couple of minutes. I'm like, wait, what's fueling this discomfort? Can I pinpoint what it is? Oh, my sock doesn't feel good. I take my sock off and the emotion goes away. And so it's one of those things where I'm like, sometimes it's thirst. Sometimes it's, similarly, I can go for like a day and a half without eating because I forget that food is a thing. And then somebody reminds me, it's like, oh, have you eaten today? It's like, no, and I didn't. Wait, when did I eat last? Right? Oh, that uncomfortable feeling I have that's been going on for like 6 hours, that's just hunger. And then I eat something and then I'm fine in like 10 minutes. Like, oh, shit. But it's like, it's embarrassing to admit, right? Because my ex-wife was like, how can you forget to eat? I think about food all the time. And I'm like, yeah, I hear you. But I don't like, I don't know. It's not how my brain is wired.
Now for me, it's like, I took the embarrassment out. I basically like, I haven't eaten for 2 days. That's it. There's no reason to be embarrassed because it's me. It's just the way it is at this point in time. And because the feeling of embarrassment or that's not normal. And you start comparing yourself with some outside whatever, baseline, the normal, the neurotypical, whatever that means, whoever made up what is normal. I think this is what ultimately makes us have fights with ourselves and pushes us down. And with that, that's when then the tremors and the stress responses start to happen, and you realize, oh, okay, no, I should have been eating. It's like, okay, I made a schedule at some point, and if I don't eat at 1 p.m., I likely forget it.
For me, it was always like, oh, I'm not humaning well enough. And so in addition to not doing the thing, I'm feeling guilt or shame or any of those other emotions. But as you say, those are ones I put on myself. Like it's some interesting mental jujitsu. But the other thing that is true is that it is possible, right? You can actually, I mean, somebody pointed out the other day that gaslighting yourself into being okay, there's literally an arm of psychology that does that. Quick aside. In the moment, I couldn't remember the name of CBT, but I wanted to add some context. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is like kind of a mental workout routine for your brain. It's designed to help you spot those sneaky negative thoughts, things like, I'm a total failure, or nothing ever goes right. It turns out they can be challenged head on. Instead of letting those gloomy interpretations run the show, CBT teaches you to replace them with a more balanced, more realistic perspective. The idea is that if you change how you think, you'll naturally start to feel and act differently too. And when you start acting or feeling differently, you start to think differently. So it's kind of an upward spiral. Now, in a hilariously oversimplified way, you could say that CBT is basically learning to gaslight yourself into feeling okay. Don't worry, I'm totally kidding, kind of. The point isn't to lie to yourself, but to question the dark and twisty stories that your mind actually spins. And by doing so, it becomes possible to break the cycle of letting emotions hijack your entire mood and run off into the sunset with your sanity. Now, CBT isn't about pretending everything is sunshine and rainbows. It's about nudging your brain toward a healthier, more grounded reality. In practice, what that means is working through structured exercises, chatting with a therapist, and sometimes doing homework between sessions. Now, over time, you'll start noticing the patterns behind your emotional responses, and you'll learn to intervene before they spiral. And that's the real beauty of CBT. It kind of hands you the keys to your own mental control room, empowering you to actively steer your thoughts and feelings in the direction that serves you better. Might not be magic, but it feels pretty damn close when it all starts clicking into place. Anyway, let's get back to Philipp.
We all had those moments when we're lying on the couch or in bed and you're like, I should be doing all of those 1,000 things, but I'm not doing anything but scrolling on TikTok, playing an idle game or whatever floats your boat. And you're beating yourself up over this. But something on my journey I started doing is when I have these moments, I acknowledge those moments. I'm like, I'm likely lying here because I need it. So maybe I shouldn't fight it. Maybe I should just embrace it. And
Maybe even enjoy it.
yes, because the thing is, what happens, and I had it today as well, because today was one of those days of big changes. I mean, we're recording this in early December, so my wife just put up the Christmas tree and decoration, so the whole thing is different. And I was like, okay, currently the only thing coming to mind is I hate it. It's going to take a moment for me to embrace it, but I was lying on the couch today and was like, I should be doing all of those things and I'm not doing it. And then you start getting into this weird loop of like, you're trying to force yourself up to do something, but it just doesn't work. And I had those moments before where I embraced it, and at some point it just eases out and you get up and you do stuff because you didn't fight it. You embraced it and you had fun doing it. It's like, and then, I mean, TikTok is really good at getting to the bottom of the barrel quite quickly. When the conspiracy theory videos start, it's usually good time to stop.
I've never had training as a mechanical engineer, but the garbage that's out there where people are making things, I'm like, wait, that's not just dangerous, that will kill you. Like, this is a terrible idea. And that's my sign to put my phone away. I'm like, okay, I've reached the stupid end of the internet again, and it's making me very angry. I have that in TV shows too. I'm watching Blacklist right now, and the amount of mistakes in that TV show, I'm like, why? Did you have no fact checkers? And I'm like, oh, the fact that I'm angry about this means that there's something else going on. Yes, there shouldn't be mistakes in TV shows, but I'm the only person who's upset by this, maybe. So, and it's the idea of a meditation bell, right? If you are in a, like the whole Zen thing of, if you're driving your car and somebody cuts you off, that's your reminder to meditate, to take a breath. If it's a red light, that's a reminder to take a breath. If somebody honks at you, it's a reminder to take a breath. Like, and just retraining yourself from, why'd you cut me off, you asshole, to, thank you for reminding me to breathe, right? That kind of thing. I'm not fully there, I'll be super honest, but as a practice, that has been very helpful for me. And I'm kind of hearing a similar thing from you, where you're like finding acceptance, finding like, well, I have a should here, but that should isn't mine. I'm just going to put it aside and continue with my life.
Yeah, I would even argue every should or could, I should have, I could have, it's energy wasted you should put into what am I doing now and what should I do tomorrow. So it's past things. So these moments when I got cut off or whatever, they don't bother me, as long as it doesn't actually endanger someone and the situation gets resolved without accidents.
Right.
You're not honking at me. You're likely honking because something in your day has happened. Sure, if I screwed up, then please do honk.
Somebody put up a Christmas tree and now you're dysregulated and you honk at people.
happens to everyone. I don't even think you need to be neurodivergent for that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's
for sure.
But this all only works when you accept yourself. It's if you accept yourself, it's way easier to accept other people for who they are, because you also don't really have time to judge them because you're busy with accepting yourself, because that's a full-time job in itself. But it really gives this opportunity of a more, I don't know how to say it. It's kind of like a serene way of listening to others. Like, okay, I'm not judging you for doing a stupid mistake. I'm doing stupid mistakes too. And I would even say, when I've been mentoring people within the professional environments, like, fail often to succeed sooner. The more you fail, the more you learn. There is no negative outcome most of the times. Of course, there are negative outcomes, but it's either you learn or you succeed. And the challenge only comes when you stop learning, or when you don't learn at all. That's when it becomes a negative thing.
That is a really soothing thought. Thank you.
Yeah, it's all about perspective, right? It's how can I gain perspective of what I'm doing? And perspective is only possible if you step aside. If you look at what you're doing from a different point of view, if you're allowing yourself to realize, okay, it's maybe not about me. It's maybe the other person's life is as complex as mine. Maybe they have shit going on too. I don't know. But I'm here and like, oh, you cut me off, you asshole. No. It's like, I don't know what they've been through. So why judge them? I have a hard time judging myself. How am I supposed to judge someone else?
Well, I think for me, the opposite is true. I'm so good at judging myself that I want to be a little bit less good. And maybe I extend that courtesy to other people as well.
Yeah, but it's judging yourself is usually a form of invalidating what you want to do. And
It's actively self-destructive.
Oh, yeah.
It's not helpful.
and it's so. I mean, I've done this throughout my life, and I'm still doing it. But it's getting this. It's profoundly. This journey of self-acceptance is making a real profound difference in my life. It's really, really interesting. And I've also stopped judging these moments of like, it's my favorite example at the moment is stage fright. We all know it. We've all been there. Public speaking, be it in front of a conference with 1,000 people or speaking up in a meeting or whatever, you have this weird feeling, your heart rate increases, your adrenaline pumps in. But at the end, I actually think it should be called a stage high and not a fright, because I actually think it's excitement and not everything.
Well, that's to your point from earlier, right? It's the excitement versus anxiety. Yeah. It's actually the same emotion type situation.
Yeah, it pumps you up to be on top of your game. That's what adrenaline and heightened heart rate does. But when you start fighting it, that's the moment you start sweating, you get tremors, you go to the bathroom, and so there's so many stress responses, and it's so relatable, this experience. And I think just looking at it from a different point of view sometimes can give you perspective on things. And I've tried it since then, since I realized that, to just embrace the feeling. And similar to other things, it's like you go on stage and you just feel how it eases out. And you actually remember what you talked about on stage. You actually remember what you're talking about in this podcast. Because guess what? I had this feeling before this podcast as well. It's like, okay, cool. No, but it's part of the journey. And so now I'm embracing that journey, and it's going to be okay. It's part of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's interesting you mentioned stage fright specifically. I had debilitating stage fright. And I can't even remember what happened, but now I am like, for a while I was working at TechCrunch and I was on stage quite a bit, thousands and thousands of people. It doesn't bother me even a little. It's like even the flutter has gone away. I'm like, okay, I got this. And I think to me, it's this sense of like absolute mastery, of like knowing, hey, I may not be the best person in the world, but I'm definitely one of the best people in the room, and I got this. And that sense of like overcompensating is, of course, a mask in itself. It's like, I wouldn't do this if I wasn't the best person in the room. It's like, wait a minute, what is that about, right? And that's a level of like setting the bar so high that it's kind of conditional self-acceptance in a way, where like, okay, I can self-accept myself if I've written all those books behind me. So I can self-accept when I've written 20 books. I was like, how many books is enough, Haje? How many books do you have to have written before you accept that you're good enough at this thing, that you know how to write a book? And it's one of those things where it's like, I think Jim Carrey has this incredible speech where he's saying, I am 3-time Grammy nominee winning Jim Carrey, and if only I won 4, I would be worthy of love. And I was like, oh God. Him too? So this conversation reminded me of this speech, and it's so good that I quickly just wanted to drop in a brief snippet from it. It's from Jim Carrey's 2016 Golden Globe speech. Look it up. The whole thing is only 2 minutes long, but it's extraordinary. Here's a quick clip.
I am 2-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey. When I dream, I don't just dream any old dream. No, sir. I dream about being 3-time Golden Globe winning actor Jim Carrey. Because then I would be enough.
I listen back to this speech from time to time, and it's always a reminder to me. But I'm going to let Philipp actually make the point here.
I think it's looking for validation outside. It's trying to find a point of measure. It's like, oh, I'm only good in public speaking if I've talked in front of 1,000 people, or if I've done. Mastery is definitely a point in that. So I would even say mastery is something where you become confident in your ability to succeed in something, which makes you, because the audience in, let's say, mastery in public speaking, the audience is part of the deal. So the mastery in there is kind of like you become a master software engineer or become a master in woodworking. At some point, it just becomes a form of muscle memory and second nature. And I think this is something that is soothing itself. But when you look at, okay, how many books do I need to write, or how successful does something need to be for me to actually be happy, or how much approval I need to get or praise I need to get from some, it's like, I think this is not healthy. Because at the end, we're always looking outwards for validation. We always look outwards to be like, oh, social media, I need 1,000 likes, otherwise I'm not successful, otherwise my picture isn't good. My hobby is landscape photography. If you go on my Instagram, at philcwm. Whatever, I don't post that often, because guess what? I'm taking the pictures for me. I don't even really care if someone else sees them. I like the process, which is super weird because I hate walking around without a goal. So just walking around a city for walking around's sake, not me. But just taking pictures of gannets, and I'm talking 4,500 pictures. I do this all day long. Happy to do that. Yeah. And it's just this beautiful thing. But at the end, it's also self-acceptance. I think, and this aligns with, I think, the Buddhist belief system, happiness, love is unconditional. You're born with that. And everything else is just a comfort. And you're being trained very, very, very early on with looking for those comforts for happiness. It's like, I want ice cream because ice cream is good. And ice cream makes me happy. And then you realize ice cream costs money. So suddenly happiness is attached to ice cream and money. And you're in this vicious cycle of, oh, if I don't get a Ferrari by 45, then I'm not going to be happy. Guess what? You're happy all along. It's right. Just weaving through all of those outside comforts. For me, for the longest time, I was talking with my therapist about, where's my happy place? I used to have a happy place. And I was just looking and looking and looking. And at some point I realized, dang, I'm looking in the wrong place. I'm looking outside. I should be looking inside. So what was it? Which situations are situations where I feel happy? And again, the same mistake. Which situations? What do I need to do to my environment to make me happy? No. What is me? What does happiness mean for me? And it's not something outside. And I realize I have more and more of these serene moments where you just feel like everything flows around you, everything feels right. And these moments of feeling right, those are moments I think we actively need to acknowledge to be able to reconnect to our inner self.
Yeah. Yeah, what you just said reminded me of one of the moments of external validation I was trying to go for, where, as I mentioned, I got bullied a lot. And one of the things people would say was that I was stupid. And I was like, wait, I can disprove that. And so as soon as I turned 18, I went to Mensa and got a test done. And I came back and I qualified to be a member. And so now I had a piece of paper that showed I wasn't stupid. And for a while, I carried it around with me. And the next person who told me I was stupid, I showed them the paper. I was like, look, you are wrong. And do you want to guess whether or not I got bullied more or less after that?
Yeah. I think we all know where this is going.
And it's one of those things where I was like, I was so like, in my own mind, everybody's telling me I'm stupid. I know I'm not stupid. I'm going to go prove it. But of course, it was me that needed to believe that, and not them. Like, they don't give a shit. I just gave them more effort. I was called Mensa Kid for the next 2 years. And I was like, well, that's not helpful. Like, that's not helpful at all. And it's one of those things where I'm like, thinking about it now, I'm like, how did I think that was going to work? It is mad how the brain works.
Yeah, but it made sense in the moment, right? It gave you an opportunity to reflect. It gave you an opportunity to be like, hey, look, I have this piece of paper. What you're saying is not right, because context matters. But the thing is, and I don't want to oversimplify bullying, but when you look at bullying, it's usually not about the person who is being bullied. It is about the person who is bullying. And this goes back to what I said earlier, that at the end, we always assume it's about us because we don't appreciate the complexities within the other people's lives. I mean, especially when you're still with a 1 in front of your age, you have this even harder time to appreciate that. But it's realizing, okay, maybe it's a defense mechanism on their side. I don't know. I don't know what's going on in their life. So me being at their target is unfortunate for me because I don't want to be there, but it actually has nothing to do with me.
Yeah, totally. And you don't have to read very far into a psychology book to realize that bullying makes people feel powerful. And if that's the only thing they can do to feel powerful, then it makes total 100% sense, right? They have a sense of power or a sense of control that they may not otherwise have. And I actually have a lot of empathy with that. I've felt moments of not feeling in control, and I'm like, I will do literally anything to feel like I have some level of control over my life, including some very self-destructive things. But yeah, it's the root cause stuff, and playground bullying is not the way to get to root cause of trauma. But I have a lot of empathy for it now, actually, which took me a long time to get there.
Yeah, and control, I think, is the important word there. It's about control, and it's the same here. It's like I'm standing in front of the elevator, and the elevator is not quick enough because I'm not in control of it. And I will never be in control of it, except I'm like, oh, let's build an elevator company. It's these moments where you feel out of control, where you feel like you're getting agitated. Where like, okay, our living room changed to a Christmas theme now. I'm bumping into things because they're not where they used to be anymore. So I feel out of control. So I'm getting agitated. So it kind of always goes around this topic of control. The moments I feel the most serene, the most myself, are moments where I'm completely in control of everything around me. When I'm listening to music and at the same time keeping my brain busy with, I don't know, science stuff or a complicated puzzle or whatever, playing a video game at the same time and having a TV show running. So my brain is just occupied, and I have everything under control, and there's no wild card.
That isn't control. That is the illusion of control, right? And so you're tricking your brain into like, okay, I've controlled everything in my environment, but if somebody runs a car into the sides of your house, there's nothing you can do about it, right? And so I think there's this piece where I think the serenity of feeling like, okay, I can let everything go. My central nervous system is chilling, and again, it's mental jujitsu, like realizing that you'll never be in control, and that's okay. I'm taking charge of the things I can control, and leaving everything else to just be as it is.
Yep, absolutely. It's the circle of influence. It's like, what do I have control over? Who do I have control over? What can I maybe inform and affect? And the weird thing is, at some point during my life, I actually realized bigger systems are easier to get a control over than smaller systems, because it's kind of like I want to say it was within Parkinson's law about the bike shed phenomenon of like, it's the simple thing, the bike shed that is everyone has an opinion about, and it's the nuclear power plant that they outsource. So the bigger challenges, the bigger problems are actually things you have an easier time getting into and gaining control over than the smaller ones, is the more detailed ones, because everyone has a grasp of it. And you have a point with it's a sense of control, it's the idea of control and the control of environment, because at the end there are always going to be uncertainties. and uncertainties are part of life. And as a neurodivergent individuals, you develop this billion-page script of, what if this? Then I say this, and you're just prepared for everything. And the more and more, and this goes back to mastery, the more and more you master a topic, the more script pages you have around that topic. So when you're on stage and you've been doing this for a decade, then you've done it all.
Yeah.
It's everything that can go wrong has likely already gone wrong, and it's only the edge cases. So we're not even looking at the bell curve anymore. We're looking at the very, very edges of the bell curve, the 5% on the left and the 5% on the right. And the more you do something, the more this reduces at the end.
Not to make it super meta, but this podcast is part of that for me, right? It's not that I can predict everything you might possibly say or everything that might possibly happen, but I now have learned to trust my curiosity. I've learned to listen and to be curious. And you have said a ton of interesting stuff. Like, I've made a mental list of like 90 things I can ask you about, but that is just because I've just let it go. I'm like, I don't need to have a list of questions. I don't need to have a whatever. And it's interesting with some of the guests on the podcast are like, hey, can you send me a list of questions? I was like, I'm happy to send you a list of questions. I won't be using that list, but I can send you a list of questions, right? And I'm like, I'm happy to be your ally in giving you a sense of control. And I promise you, I absolutely promise that by the time we get talking, this is going to be easy for both of us. And it's been especially interesting with the people who went in really nervous, like, I don't believe you. I was like, you don't have to believe me. Just trust me and say, look, if we sit quietly and say nothing for 10 minutes, we cut it out. It's like, there's no harm done kind of thing. And I think it's one of those things, like, I've been in radio for long enough. Like, in radio, you can't have dead air, right? That is a disaster. But this isn't radio. It's like radio, but it's not radio. And the back of my head is like, yeah, I've got this. And if it's an absolute trash fire, like if both of us turn up super activated and don't know anything to say, we just don't publish it. It's so easy. And I'm like, well, that makes this a really enjoyable activity for me. And hopefully for my guests as well.
No, absolutely. And I do appreciate the conversational style. And that's also something when I moderate a panel or a fireside chat or whatever. It's about a conversation. Because at the end, asking written questions gets you answers to pre-written questions. It doesn't get you the who is this person and why is this answer actually important to them, and how it goes back to this maybe even false sense of control of, okay, I'm doing this because I have the questions, I know what I'm going to be asked, so I'm going to be mentally prepared for it, and I did not even think about asking you for any questions up front because A, I have done that stuff before, and B, similar to you, I use this to figure out where's my comfort zone. I use this to figure out what can I do, what can't I do, and I accept the feelings alongside the road. To like, okay, cool, this might make me feel uncomfortable. And some things I might say might make me feel uncomfortable in a week from now. And it's just part of that conversation. And it's part of that journey we are on. And I appreciate having that conversation with you.
One of the most interesting things I learned was actually from business. It's the concept of a BATNA, or a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Where you have a negotiated agreement, and then you think about, okay, if this agreement falls apart, what is the backstop? Like, what is the worst thing that could happen? And it turns out with that kind of mindset, that applies to so many different things. Like, we have a social contract, but if the social contract falls apart, are you going to murder me? Probably not, right? And so the edges of the possible outcomes are somewhat defined. Like, if I walked into a shop and I went nonverbal. I couldn't use my words. And so I just put on the counter and I pointed, and they spoke to me, and I just pointed at my ear and I shook my head. And I don't know what they know, like if they thought I was deaf or whatever, but I was able to complete the transaction, right? So the worst case scenario was I could still go and buy my bag of coffee. And I'm like, well, that's kind of why I went there. So worst case scenario still accomplishes the goal. I was very uncomfortable, and I'm sure so were they. But the next time I was in the shop, I came in and said, oh, I was having a bad day. And they were like, we don't even remember what you're talking about. Great.
Which goes back to everyone has complexities in their life. And even though you think, oh, me asking for an accommodation, me asking for help, or me not being able to speak is gonna make them uncomfortable, it's not about you. Their life is not about you. Their life is about them. And it's something, I, for example, have a really hard time sitting with my back into an open room, because it takes so much energy from me to be able to focus just in this direction, into the direction in front of me, because my brain is just always omni-aware. And in the beginning, my wife asked for the accommodations, and now I'm getting better and better asking for accommodations. But it's tricky, and it's, again, self-acceptance. Asking for accommodations doesn't mean you're lesser. That means that you're asking someone for help. And guess what? People working in a restaurant, it's kind of their job to help you because they want to make business as well. So in the first place, asking is the same in a grocery store. It's like their job is to sell you produce. So if you can't talk or can't hear or can't whatever, it's still their job to sell produce. So they gonna do everything required to help you get produce. And when it's just asking about, would it be possible to get a seat with my back to the wall so I can look into the open room? It's just a question, but there's so much weight attached to it, and it's so hard to ask for it. And especially when you're around people who know you and who know you for a long time, because, you've never asked for that before. Why are you asking for that now? It's like, now that you have your diagnosis, you're so different. Like, no, I'm not, but I'm learning about myself, and I'm learning to accept myself, and I learn to accept that I might need an accommodation. I might need to ask someone for help, or be inconvenient for someone. But me being inconvenient for someone is me thinking that I'm inconvenient for someone. So it's an assumption of my place. And something I always taught when I was mentoring people in professional environments, like, if you have to assume, ask. Never assume, always ask. But living to those things, that's hard. Saying it is way easier.
Right. Well, and the thing is, it's about carving new neural pathways, right? And having like this sense of like, I always did it this way, but I was also always this uncomfortable. How could I be more comfortable? Or how can I protect my energy? I think the really powerful thing that I'm noticing right now, it kind of goes to the point you've made 20 times already. It's about self-knowing and self-acceptance.
But it's when you talk about energy and what to put energy into, it's also this question. I mean, come back to long-term partner, and you're like, okay, some of my masking, the energy I need to put into this, might actually benefit my partner more than the energy I'm putting into it. So then it becomes a question of compromise. Then it becomes a question of it's a bit of a hard word for it, but self-sacrifice. It's like, am I doing this for me, or am I doing this for this person? And again, the more you accept yourself, the more you're actually willing to sacrifice things for others. Because, other people might not be mentally at the same place you are. They might not exist in the same plane of existence that you are on, but you might just be the person to help them with part of their journey, or to be there, not even help, just being there.
Yeah, and I'm observing you stumble over the word self-sacrifice, and I think sacrifice kind of brings to mind seppuku. I'm like, okay, we're not disemboweling ourselves here. It's a cost-benefit thing. The benefit to you has a cost to me, but that's a cost I'm willing to pay. I think that's a totally fair That's something we do every day, all day, right? And especially for our loved ones, like, oh, like this is something that costs me 1 energy unit, but makes you 5 times happier. Great. I'm happy to spend that energy unit.
Very much agreed. It's there's this, I think it's the concept of spoons in the neurodivergent world. You have so many spoons to give every day. Sometimes you start negative, sometimes you start positive, but it's your choice where you spend energy. Even though it sometimes might not feel like your choice. And this is what I was saying earlier with the moment you acknowledge something, it becomes a choice. That's how I see the world at this point. It's like, okay, I acknowledge that I have tremors. My psychiatrist is like, oh, you have a slight tremor. You should look into that. Like, what happens if I don't? Like, I think you like yourself by now enough to look into that. So I started tracking it. And just this acknowledgement of it happening, this awareness, made me realize where it's coming from. It was a stress response. And before that, I've never looked. I never even bothered to look. It's like, I fairly honestly didn't even realize I had tremors before I got told. The sweating portion was something I realized, and I got so annoyed. And it went so far that I did not want to do any activity and I still have a hard time doing activities that could get me to sweat, because I built this massive wall of I hate sweating in my head. And then I started tracking it, acknowledging it, and realizing it's still not a choice, right? It's not a choice, oh, I'm not going to sweat. That's not how the body works. But the acknowledgement and the realization of, oh, this was because I was stressed with something, kind of made it an active mechanism, an active sign for something. And that's what I'm saying. It's even though it might not feel like a choice, it becomes something you gain a very weird sense of control over. It's like this utterly weirdly shaped object where you start to find the balance of it. And you start to realize, like, oh, if I put a little bit there and a little bit there, I can change the balance in this direction and this. Utterly complicated and goes wrong all the time. But it's something, when you start looking inwards, you actually realize that there is some sort of a control over it.
And so if somebody's listening to this and they're like, hey, I would like some of what Philipp is smoking, this self-acceptance pipe, I want to puff. Where do you recommend somebody begins? Like, how do you even, like, what was the beginning of your journey, and what is some advice you would give somebody else?
That's a very good question. Where was the beginning of my journey? I think the beginning of my journey was starting to read, starting to read about what does being neurodivergent mean, but making sure that I'm not only looking from one side of the equation, but also from the other side. So you always want to read the things you disagree with, even though it's hard sometimes, and you're like, fucking hell. So I did that, and I did, there are many published books around the topic of being an autistic adult from all directions. And then I started reading scientific papers. So it kind of became this special interest for a while. And then I looked a little bit over to the edge cases. So it's like I dipped my toes into parapsychology, looked at what's happening there. I even did a couple of university courses. Yay, free education. edX.com or edX.org or something. If you don't need the piece of paper at the end, it's free. If you need the piece of paper, it costs money. But education should be free. So that helped me kind of put myself into perspective, or gave myself a framework to be in. But the real step to learning about self-acceptance was as stupid as it might sound, an interview with a skateboarder.
Say more.
So there's a skateboarder. His name is Rodney Mullen. He is the inventor of the ollie, the thing that's kind of the base for everything, right? And he's autistic. And he said,
You know, I'm hella impressed that Philipp was able to quote this from memory verbatim. But you know what's even better than a quote? The actual clip.
My mom, she was a concert pianist when she was a little kid, and I grew up around music, classical music. So I grew up hearing it and reading about these guys, these great composers. And Beethoven's music always struck me. Always. He had this fire. I remember reading the story of him going deaf and pushing himself into self-isolation, and that's where he became himself. And to me, that was, wow. Don't let anything poison your individuality. Be away, break away, and look in, not outward. What makes us all do what we do at a high level is an inspiration that comes so deep as almost like a controlled desperation. And if you can't tap into that, then it just extinguishes.
And I started figuring out, what does this even mean for myself to look in? How do I look in? I realized that I started putting words on how I perceive the world. Still have a very hard time doing that. So my world is kind of like the Big Bang Theory intro in n dimensions. And whenever I talk to someone who comes from a different profession or perspective, it adds another dimension to it. And this goes on all the time, every time. And there is no pause button or anything. And it's like 1 billion times quicker than the Big Bang Theory intro. It's insane. But it enables me to make very, very many quick connections for things that might not be obvious for others. Then not saying is the obvious thing for me is usually not obvious for others, so people get upset. But so I started putting words on how I perceive the world. I started to communicate how I perceive the world, and started to meet like-minded people, and realizing the usage of words, realizing the framework I'm in or I'm being put in, because being neurodivergent puts you in a framework, puts you in a lot of biases. Realizing how people interact with you after you tell them that you're neurodivergent. Most people they don't really change anything. Some people like suddenly talk to you like you're stupid. Like, okay, interesting. And really, like you said earlier, coming from a place of curiosity, not only outwards, but also inwards. Like, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean if my therapist talks about this and this and this? And there was one concept where she was telling me, like, oh yeah, there's a concept in behavioral science where it talk about the emotional mind, the rational mind, and the wise mind. And just realizing this conversation happens, and this kind of goes back to what Freud said was super ego and stuff, but it's realizing that this conversation actively happens in your head when you're, for example, lying on the couch scrolling on TikTok. It's like, oh, interesting. And it's really building this awareness for those moments. And with this awareness, getting the choice of what do I do with this awareness? Not particularly what I do with the situation or gaining control, but the choice of what am I doing with this awareness now. And this ultimately led me onto this path of doing this more and more, doing it more structured, with be it tracking it in notes, that put me into a place where I can say, I think I'm pretty good at accepting myself. Would I say I've mastered it? No, not by any stretch. But I'm getting pretty good at it. There's still moments where you get upset and where you're like, oh my gosh, if this thing would have just, if the plant would just, today, if the plant would just stand where it used to stand for the last part of the year, everything in my life would be better. It still happens. So
right.
something to takeaway is really, before you look outwards, look inwards. Ask yourself, like, okay, how am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling like this? And don't question it. It's like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling that way. No, you're feeling like this for a reason. Figure out why, not fight it.
Yeah, no, I feel that viscerally in my body as you're saying that. I've had a really hard few months, and I kind of found myself playing the role of the victim, where I was like, oh, my life is happening to me type situation. And what I realized is that is a choice. Like, I can't affect what is happening to me, but I can affect how I think about it. And so I can choose to say, oh, I'm a victim, woe is me, and, make everybody around me miserable and, fall into self-destructive patterns. Or, so that's the shadow side. The positive side of the same thing is to be the creator. It's like, okay, all these things that's happening, this is the landscape. How do I want to orient myself to this landscape? And how am I going to walk through it? And again, like, all the things that happened to me over the past 3 months still happened. But now I'm like, oh, I get to catalyze and approach this from a place that I want to. And it's absolutely crazy to me how I can look at exactly the same situations and go, oh yeah, that's fine. When I was spiraling. And it's one of those things where sometimes I just need to be reminded. And sometimes I just need to have a little jolt to the system. And what I'm hoping is that over time, that I'm able to be more of reminding myself that I don't need an external stimulus to remind me, hey, Haje, you're spiraling, or dude, what the fuck? Like, get a grip of yourself. And of course, when somebody says that never lands well. But like, and this is something I've done with my partner now, where I've given her a phrase. It's like, hey, if you notice this happening again, say this thing to me, and I will go and take action. And it's been super powerful. Like, I gave her the phrase. So if she gives me that phrase back, like, it's my words. It's not her criticizing me. It is her reminding me of what I know to be true. And that, again, it's just jiu-jitsu, but it's such a powerful realignment of how to be in the world. And it feels a little like magic. It's like nothing really changed except everything changed.
Yeah, it's kind of like Batman's tool belt.
Right.
You have these tools. It's I've been seeing a psychoeducator for a while now, and it's not about how to be less autistic. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. It's understanding what are agitators, understanding what are instigators, understanding what are methods of de-escalation. How can you identify, oh, I'm agitated because of this, and this. So, for example, today, I can tell you I'm agitated because our whole living room looks different. A year ago, 2 years ago, I would have likely just been agitated.
Right.
Because you don't have the vocabulary. And when you have these moments where it's like you have this realization, you acknowledge it, and you put a phrase on it to share with your partner to say, okay, if you see this pattern emerging, and I've shared the workings with my psychoeducator, with my wife as well, not recently actually, so I maybe should share the update. But it's you giving your partner a tool set to help them help yourself. And
right.
It becomes the second degree thing again from what we talked about in the beginning. It's kind of like an anti-masking.
Yeah, like a nega mask. It's like the imprint of the mask.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is, like, I hear you say, my apartment changed. I hear you say, I am agitated. What I'm not hearing you say is, I'm pissed off with my partner for changing shit. Right? And so I think there's something there. Like, there is a universe where, like, you could have blamed something outside of yourself. And what I'm observing you doing is the opposite. You're saying, oh, I have enough self-knowing that this agitation is real and I'm going to accept it. And I'm sure if you told your partner, hey, could we not do Christmas shit this year because it makes me uncomfortable? You might be able to have a conversation about that, right? But I'm also hearing you say, hey, I'm willing to suffer this temporary discomfort because maybe some part of you is like, oh, it'll be fun to have a house that looked like Christmas for a bit. I'm just putting words on you. I don't know if that's true at all.
No,
How does
but
that land on you?
it's yeah, it's absolutely like that. I mean, it's I'm not a big fan of things for the wrong reasons, and we can go into why I think Christmas is for the wrong reasons. I don't need a date to acknowledge someone. I don't need a date to be like, oh yeah, now we share nice spirits. Like, no, just always be kind, always be nice to other people. If you think of a loved one and you're like, oh, it's not their birthday, you can still give them a gift.
Right.
It doesn't need those arbitrary dates, but it means a lot to her. So, and I know for me, I now know. A year ago we would not have that conversation, but I now know it's like it's gonna take, I would say, maybe 2-3 days for me to get acquainted with the place again. It's similar to our cat. He also got upset when everything is different.
Right.
But he seems to be a bit quicker because he's already lying under the Christmas tree.
Right.
So
Congratulations, your cat is autistic.
there's this saying, right? Dogs are ADHD and cats are autistic, right? They don't like change. They don't like loud noises. They don't like to be touched and hugged. Some apparently do. Not ours. He always complains when he gets picked up or hugged, only on his terms.
Yep.
But yeah, it's change, and like you're saying, it's 2 years ago I would have likely been upset with my partner. Today I'm not upset. I'm just acknowledging I'm agitated, and it's okay to be agitated because things have changed.
Right.
And I've already started moving a couple of things around because they bothered me the way they were, but the essence of it stays the same. And but this can only come from a place of self-acceptance. If you don't accept yourself and you don't listen inwards, you will always look outside. You will always look for something to blame of why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Guess what? You're feeling the way you're feeling because you're feeling the way you're feeling. It's part of you.
Totally. Well, and this goes to what we were saying earlier, right? The cost of a upset in your house is a cost to you, and the joy that your partner gets from Christmasing up the house has value, and it makes her happy. And so it's like it's a really good example of exactly that.
And I'm very happy to do that. Not today, but maybe in 2 days from now.
Yeah.
And when you're then sitting on the couch with a hot chocolate or something, and you watch random bonfire on your TV, because that's apparently how it's done these days, then everything is forgotten and everything is normal again. But it's going back to this question of what is normal? What does this mean? What is the baseline we're trying to be on, and how do we define and how do we find that baseline? And it's not easy. It's really not easy. Yeah. But yeah, it's being hard on yourself is usually not what helps.
I think that is a really beautiful way to conclude. I have 2 questions that I like to ask everybody at the end of one of these interviews. The first one is, what do you wish people would understand about autism?
That it's not a disorder or a disease. It's a different way of our neurological makeup, and it's okay. And it has its beauty, it has its challenges. And at the end, if we help foster environments that enable people with autism, then you might be surprised how much can actually be done if you have a condition like autism.
Beautiful. And can you tell me a story of a time when you were seen and loved in exactly the right way for you?
There's no specific moment coming to mind, but the moments of being seen and accepted for who you are and how you are have gotten more and more the more I learned to accept myself, because that helped me to put into perspective how people react to me. And I still have moments with my partner, friends, where like, oh, why are you so rude? Or why are you always questioning what I'm doing? I'm not questioning, I'm just asking a question. So I'm not invalidating what you've done. I just want to know why you've done it that way, because I wouldn't have done it that way. So I want to know the context of your decision, because I want to learn from you. But these moments of feeling seen, feeling like I belong, have definitely increased with self-acceptance. But I have a very hard time, and it's one of my major triggers when I'm invalidated and when I'm being told, oh yeah, you're not saying it the right way, or you meant it this way. No, I'm saying what I'm saying. What I'm not saying is on you. But it's these moments are getting more and more, luckily, which I also think is surrounding yourself with the right kind of people, the people who feel right. I can't even put a word on how to describe those people. It just feels right.
But I think everybody who listens to this will
like
know exactly what you mean, right? There's some people who are like prickly, and there are some people who feel just like, oh yeah, this is beautiful. Philipp, thank you so much for your generous time and for your wonderful wisdoms. I love that this episode turned out to be about something other than what we planned, because I think it's perfect. This is exactly the episode I wanted, and I am so grateful for your clarity in how you got to where you are. I think it's a real gift to the listeners. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you having me and giving the platform to tell that experience and share that experience.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. You can find us on TikTok on Autistic FM, on Instagram at autistic_FM, and on the web on autistic.fm. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Haje Kamps. If you know anybody who would be a great guest on the podcast, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can email us on hello@autistic.fm, or you can reach out via the socials. Have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next week.